Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Singapore and good morning to those of you who are joining us from Europe. My name is Deepika Shetty, Press Officer for the European Union Delegation to Singapore. It is my privilege to be your MC for today's webinar. On behalf of the EU Delegation to Singapore, please allow me to warmly welcome all of you to today's event. This is the final in a series of outreach webinars on the EU-Singapore Free Trade Agreement. Today, we will step back and reflect on the implementation of the EU-Singapore FTA over the past 2 years, what has been achieved, and the cooperation to which we can look forward to in the future. Before we begin, allow me please to make a couple of housekeeping announcements. Firstly, this webinar is being recorded. The recording, like all the other webinars in this series, will be made available on the EU delegation website and on our YouTube channel. All of you who registered for the event today will receive an email with the link to the recording. We encourage you to share your questions while the proceedings are on. For this, please use the Q&A in the Zoom toolbar, which is at the bottom of your screen. For those of you who are posting comments and doing posts on various social media channels, do remember to use our hashtag EUSFTA. Our speakers today will be providing us multiple perspectives from Singapore's Ministry of Trade and Industry, Directorate General for Trade of the European Commission, Eurocham Singapore, Singapore Business Federation, and business stakeholders. I will be introducing them individually during the course of this webinar. Our moderated discussions will explore perspectives on EU-Singapore trade and investment and the role of digital transformation for a resilient post-pandemic economic recovery and the key achievements of the EU-Singapore Free Trade Agreement. It is my honor first to introduce the European Union Ambassador to Singapore, Her Excellency Ivona Piorko, and the Ambassador of Singapore to the European Union, His Excellency Lim Hong Hwai, to deliver today's welcome addresses. Ambassador Piorko, a very warm welcome. And with that, I hand the floor over to you.
Hello, thank you very much, Deepika. Are you hearing me well? I hope so.
Yes, Ambassador.
Thank you. Dear Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, indeed a very good afternoon here from Singapore, and a good morning to all of you joining us from Europe. It would be, I cannot start in any other way, despite the subject of today's webinar, differently than by stressing the difficult times in which we live, which we are going through. Obviously, they are the most difficult times, especially for Ukraine. And the European Union stands with Ukraine each and every hour of this difficult time, trying to support as much as we can in face of this unprecedented act of aggression by the Russian Federation against the sovereign independent state. This aggression is not only against Ukraine, but indeed it threatens the stability of Europe and of the whole international rules-based order. And that brings me to Singapore, as I'd like to thank Singapore for its clear stand on this aggression. Singapore, as all the politicians here, Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, stress very much, especially as a small country, values enormously the UN Charter and its rules, and stresses always how important it is to cherish it and to be in its spirit. So not only in the UN, but in all other multilateral fora, the European Union is and Singapore are strong partners. We value indeed multilateral rules order, including in trade, which is the subject of today's discussion. We both work very hard to reform WTO and to preserve rules-based free trade, also coming out, hopefully, from the pandemics. We are not yet there, but definitely in a better place than we were 2 years ago. It is also important for us in the European Union to cooperate with Singapore in its role of a very important partner in the ASEAN region. Over the last 3 years, in its former role of coordinator for ASEAN-EU relations, but its role, knowing how proactive Singapore is, continues all the time. So it's a very important partnership for us also in these terms. In October 2018, we actually signed with Singapore 3 landmark agreements: a partnership and cooperation agreement, investment protection agreement, and free trade agreements. While the first 2 agreements are still under ratification, FTA entered into force in November 2019. But back then, I think few of us, or maybe nobody, imagined that a couple of months later, we will be facing such an enormous challenge, pandemics, coronavirus. But I think we have to be all grateful that we actually had FTA already ready in place, because it really has provided us with a framework to face these pandemics together, also in terms of trade exchanges. And we saw it very quickly, first in terms of supply value chains and the initial disruptions, also concerning such products as protective equipment and vaccines, on which we worked so hard afterwards. So I think we can benefit from it even more in the future, and I'm sure today's webinar is going to help us to sum up things and find new pathways of cooperation. But I'm sure we all feel that it has served as an anchor in these turbulent times. I would like to take this occasion, as this is the last seminar in the series, to thank everyone involved in this project from the beginning, all our partners that are with us here today, and also my own team of trade and economic section in the EU delegation to Singapore. I wish you all a very good discussion, and thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Piorko, for your words, for reminding us about the EUSFTA being an anchor and for ways to find new pathways for cooperation. With that, I now warmly invite Ambassador Lim. A very warm welcome, and the floor is all yours, Ambassador. Thank you.
Hello. Hello. Well, good morning to colleagues in Europe, and very warm good afternoon to colleagues in Singapore. Your Excellency Ambassador Piorko, thank you for inviting me to join you today to take stock of our excellent bilateral relations, and in particular, the continued success of the EU-Singapore FTA since it entered into force in 2019. It has been indeed a challenging few years for the global economy. During the COVID-19 pandemic, businesses and workers in both our regions have had to grapple with an uncertain and difficult economic environment. We are not fully out of the woods yet, but there is cautious optimism that the worst of the pandemic is behind us. And indeed, today we witness to a terrible tragedy that is unfolding before our eyes in Europe. And I would just like to say that Singapore stands together with Europe and with the people of Ukraine in their time of crisis. As Ambassador Piorko has noted, bilateral trade between the EU and Singapore has held very steady during this difficult time of the pandemic. Singapore remains the EU's largest trade and investment partner in Southeast Asia. Many EU companies continue to come to Singapore to tap on the opportunities in Singapore and beyond in the region. Much of this is underpinned by the EU-Singapore FTA, which anchors our very strong and robust economic relations. And going forward, I have no doubt that the EU-Singapore FTA will continue to be critical in facilitating, empowering trade and investment between our two regions. But of course, we are not resting on our laurels. We are accelerating instead our discussions between the EU and Singapore on a digital partnership that will take our relationship into the digital realm. This is an important endeavor as we intend to cover the full spectrum of digital issues, from digital economy and trade to new and emerging areas in technology such as 5G, AI, and digital identities. This digital partnership will contribute to the development of a global architecture of interoperable standards at both the regional and multilateral settings. These digital trends, we all know, will have transformative economic potential. AI, robotics, nanotechnology, quantum computing are going to transform economies and the social fabric of a society. And therefore, we're very happy to see that there is a shared ambition for an ambitious, concrete, and tangible digital partnership that will benefit companies and workers. Overall, EU-Singapore relations have grown from strength to strength. We share a very close and productive relationship, and we have many mutual interests spanning trade, sustainability, digital connectivity, peace and security, amongst others. In summary, the first 2 years of our FTA has been a success, and there's clearly potential to do more. My warmest congratulations to the teams on both sides for a very effective implementation of the agreement, and I wish you a very successful webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. A strong and robust economic relationship, and looking forward very much to what you call our shared ambition towards a digital partnership. We will now have two keynote addresses. And first, I would like to welcome a long-standing friend of the European Union and the EU delegation to Singapore, Mr. Chua Shun Leong, Director North America and Europe at the Ministry of Trade and Industry, Singapore. Shun Leong, thank you for joining us again, and it's over to you.
Thanks very much, Deepika, for the introductions. I'd like to start by wishing those of us in Singapore a very good afternoon. And for colleagues dialing in from Europe, in particular Brussels, a very good morning to all of you. So, dear Excellencies, and my esteemed colleague Christoph will be speaking as well. I would like to start by thanking the EU delegation, in particular our colleague Justina, for the kind invitation to speak at this webinar. Singapore, I want to just echo what Ambassador Hong Hai mentioned just now, that this is a moment of that particular challenge for people in Europe and Ukraine, and Singapore stands with the people of Europe. Now I'd like to go into my remarks proper. I think that the seminar today is very appropriately themed and to really focus on how, after 2 years of implementation of the EU-Singapore FTA, what are some of the key achievements and what are some of the forward-looking areas of cooperation that both sides can work towards. And I will organize my remarks in that manner as well. Key achievements and forward-looking cooperation. In terms of key achievements, I think it's still too early to tell in terms of some of the trade and investment statistics because, for instance, in services trade flows, the statistics do lag a bit. So we don't have the maybe a full set of numbers for at least a couple of years to look at. However, I'm very happy to share some early report card outcomes. Bearing in mind that the EU-Singapore FTA is the first FTA between the EU and an ASEAN country, it was meant to be a pathfinder towards, FTAs, a larger EU-ASEAN FTA between Europe as well as ASEAN. So it's not just a pathfinder in terms of being a legal document, but also a pathfinder in terms of its implementation, how smooth has it been, and also in terms of its benefits, are both sides benefiting? And in that regard, I'm very happy to share some early report card outcomes to underscore how the EU-Singapore FTA is really demonstrating the effects, the positive effects of stronger connectivity and interoperability between the EU and Singapore, and hopefully for the rest of ASEAN. So here goes a couple of numbers. First, I think a lot of us will be very curious to find out, so what happened to EU-Singapore trade flows in the context of 2020 and 2021? because as Ambassador Pyoko mentioned, the EU-Singapore FTA entered into force in November 2019. Nobody would have guessed at the moment that we're just on the cusp of what is a multi-year global pandemic. So a couple of numbers. The first is that in 2020, in spite of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, goods trade flows between Singapore and the EU only decreased by less than 3% as compared to the same period last year. This is remarkable because if you were to compare, for instance, to the EU's trade with the rest of the world, that dropped by more than 11% in 2020 compared to 2019. And since then, I think it is quite clear that the EU-Singapore Free Trade Agreement has been a source of resilience and a source of stability for trade between the EU and Singapore. In 2021, as global trade started to recover, goods trade between Singapore and the EU continued to rise as well. It shot up by almost 13% compared to the same period in 2020. And on top of that, if we were to go beyond aggregated figures and look at the impact on specific types of goods, I'm also very glad to note that our trade in electrical machinery in particular, it has grown by almost 1/4, almost 25% between 2019 and 2021. And likewise, for another example is the trade in pharmaceutical products. Two-way trade has increased by over 1/5 from before the EU-Sing FTA entered into force and until 2021. So really, where are we now in 2021? Based on latest statistics, our trade in goods are back to pre-pandemic levels. Instead, in particular, indeed, it has exceeded pre-pandemic levels, and it's now more than 100 billion Singapore dollars. Sorry. I'm also pleased to share that there continues to be a growing presence of EU companies in Singapore. The number is now nearing 12,000. So we're very happy to play host, to be a second home to EU companies who need a launchpad in the region to access growth opportunities around all the markets here. So that is rather positive based on latest available statistics in terms of the EU-Singapore FTA's key achievements and what has been done. Now the question remains, what are the forward-looking areas of cooperation where there's potential for us to take things forward to the next level? On that score, I would like to share 3 particular areas and 3 ideas. The first one is that, like I mentioned before, the EU-Singapore FTA and its pathfinding role is not just in terms of a legal document that has been concluded. A lot of the pathfinding strategic significance comes in how well we implement it, how well we ensure that the benefits of greater connectivity and interoperability is distributed well. And in that regard, the first idea I have is for us to continue implementing the EU-Singapore FTA, continue trying to reach out to companies, especially the small and medium enterprises, and to help them understand how to benefit from two-way trade flows between the EU and Singapore. And in that regard, I'm very happy to share that in November 2021, last year, the EU and Singapore, we held the inaugural EU-Singapore cluster matching event, where we brought together over 150 industry clusters, business associations, as well as companies to come together and see, can we find partners? Can we forge partnerships between EU and Singapore companies? This is something that we are doing under another initiative called the EU-Singapore Administrative Arrangement on Cluster Cooperation. And I'm just very glad that we are continuing in this direction of trying to implement the free trade agreement to realize the benefits of the FTA for all companies of all sizes, especially small and medium enterprises. So that's number 1, implementing the FTA, not letting up, and making sure that the smaller players benefit. Number 2, a second area where I think we can really move the needle is to figure out how to address the digital space. The reason why I say that we want to move the needle is because the EU-Singapore FTA is already a modern and comprehensive free trade agreement that covers many aspects of the economy, many aspects of trade between the EU and Singapore. So on the face of it, it will look as though you already have a comprehensive FTA in place. What more can be done? And here's where digital will really move the needle. And I would like to share a couple of factoids on why that is the case. Number one, by some estimates in 2022, over 60% of the global economy is digital. So anything that we do to facilitate cross-border digital flows will affect more than half of the global economy. And specific to the EU and Singapore, by our own estimates, over 65% of services trade between the EU and Singapore is likely to have been delivered digitally. In other words, again, anything that we do to facilitate trade flows, and in particular services trade flows between the EU and Singapore in the digital realm, it's going to affect more than half of services trade between the EU and Singapore. And this is not just about the stock, about the current picture at hand. It's also about the growth potential and how fast things are growing. So again, two pieces of factoids. First, in Southeast Asia, estimates are that the value of the digital economy is expected to more than triple between 2020 and 2025. So right now we're in 2022, so that's halfway through. We think that it's going to grow from about 140 billion Singapore dollars in 2020 to almost $500 billion in 2025. And over in the European Union, the EU is the single largest market in the world, and the digital economy is going to be growing very, very vigorously. Some estimates are that the digital economy will boost EU GDP by over 14% by 2030. And now the question would be, what are we going to do about that? How are we going to ensure that international partnerships and cooperation is going to reinforce and further boost these very promising secular growth trends in the digital space? On that score, I would like to share that the EU and Singapore, like the ambassadors have mentioned, are already working on the outlines of a very ambitious and comprehensive digital partnership. What we want to do is to address the full spectrum of digital issues with a view to ensuring that we can address digital divides, maximize the benefits of growth in the digital space for our people, our workers, our businesses of all sizes, especially the SMEs. We're going to do this in a way that is, in the first instance, via a non-binding instrument to identify areas of cooperation, and then subsequently decide what is the best modality with which to pursue those areas of cooperation. And on a very, very interesting note, in a departure from our previous approaches on free trade agreements, this digital partnership is not only going to feature discussions around harmonizations of standards and rules and stuff like that. We will also be looking into concrete projects that are led by the private sector, projects that may involve public-private partnership. So it is all shaping up to be very innovative, very promising, and quite a different way to try to facilitate growth in the digital space as compared to earlier approaches on trade. We're going to cover digital trade, we're going to cover technological areas as well, and so on and so forth. And we invite the private sector to come along on this journey with us, especially since the digital space is a very new and emerging one that's still constantly evolving. So the second point I wanted to share in terms of forward-looking areas of cooperation is really the digital space and the digital partnership between the EU and Singapore. The third and final area that I wanted to share as a forward-looking area of cooperation is the green economy. This is a space where the EU and Singapore, again, are very much like-minded partners. Both the EU and Singapore has identified sustainability and green growth as a key plank of our national strategies, our high-level strategies for growth, and also to accelerate our respective transitions towards sustainable growth. In the case of the EU, you have the European Green Deal, which sets out very ambitious commitments to try to be the first climate neutral continent by 2050. In the case of Singapore, we've set out our Green Plan 2030. We have identified concrete plans and targets for different sectors, sector by sector, in order to advance sustainable development across our entire society, our entire economy. Recently, we just announced that we raised our ambition, our climate ambition, to try to achieve net zero emissions by or around mid-century. We also announced plans to increase our carbon taxes pretty much more than tenfold, from around $5 as of this year to potentially $50 to $80 by 2030. And I would say that these targets, ambitions, and new plans are very ambitious in the context of Singapore, because we are a small island. For those of us who are very familiar with Singapore, we are alternative energy disadvantage. We do not have thermal energy. We do not have much solar energy as well, because the cloud cover here is so thick. And also, in any case, we don't have the land. We've pretty much covered anything that we can cover with solar panels already, even including our water bodies. So for Singapore to set out these ambitions without, sources of renewable energy within our, very small confines of our island, I think this is really quite ambitious indeed. Now, in terms of what possible areas that we can cooperate on between the EU and Singapore, I think there's a lot of potential for us to achieve our climate and environment goals while also ensuring that there's growth and jobs for our people. There are three particular areas of opportunity that Singapore is pursuing, and I think we will be very interested to develop these areas with our friends in the European Union, with European Union member states, if there's interest to do so with us. First, I think there's a lot of potential in carbon services. This is a services growth play. Essentially, we think that there will be a lot more demand for services across the entire carbon services value chain, from things like carbon accounting to also green financing, taxonomies, and so on and so forth. A second area, for instance, is low carbon solutions. Some of it is more proximate and ready for deployment. It'll be things like renewable energies, large-scale deployment of solar farms, and so on and so forth. There is also carbon capture, utilization, and storage. That is also a more proximate area where Singapore will be happy to work with partners in the EU and EU member states. And further out, estimates are that hydrogen technologies may be ready for large-scale deployment as early as 2030. But prior to that, what are some of the conversations that Singapore can have with our partners to lay the foundations and set out a set of enabling conditions in order for hydrogen to really take off and to really be deployed at a large scale in time to come? So the second area is low carbon solutions. A third area, and I alluded to it just now, is green finance. This is something that's intricately related to carbon services, but I think it stands on its own as well in the context of how it will be the conduit by which private capital can be mobilized towards green investments in our region, in particular infrastructure investments. We will be very interested to work with European financial institutions to grow this space, not just in Singapore, but for the region as a whole. As you know, that Singapore is also growing to become a green finance hub for the region. I recall that last year, around 50% of all green finance activities, issuance of green bonds, etc., all that was carried out of Singapore. So this is a growing area. Singapore thinks that we have quite a lot of expertise and, in fact, a very vibrant financial services hub here in Singapore that can contribute existing expertise towards this goal of green finance and ultimately achieving our climate and environmental goals at a region-wide level. So the third area is the green economy, and I would say that's largely what I wanted to share in terms of a flash update of key achievements for the EU-Singapore FTA, and then 3 suggestions in terms of how we can continue taking our cooperation forward. I just wanted to end with a last point, which is that events of the past few weeks and in fact recent months have shown that it's very important that like-minded partners come together to uphold the open and rules-based global order. And the global trading system is a cornerstone of that. So given all that's happening around the world, I think it's all the more important that the EU and Singapore as like-minded partners come together to uphold and continue strengthening the open and rules-based multilateral trading system in whatever way we can. So I wanted to end off with really a call to action to say that it's not just something that the EU and Singapore can do on our own in terms of the governments. It's also something where we really need to depend on our respective innovative private sectors, especially in all these new and emerging areas like the digital as well as green economies. And I really invite you guys to join us on this effort. And we hope to involve you in subsequent industry consultations, especially in terms of the ongoing digital partnership discussions. Thank you very much, and I wish you a very useful and fruitful session this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shun Long, for these reflections, for highlighting the many benefits of the EU-Singapore Free Trade Agreement, for spelling out the areas of opportunity and really the way ahead with the ambitious digital partnership. It is my pleasure now to introduce Mr. Christoph Kiener, Head of Unit South and Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand at DG Trade at the European Commission. Mr. Kiener started his new position on 1st of March, so please let me warmly welcome him and thank him for his time today. It's over to you, Mr. Kiener.
Thank you very much, Deepika. Dear Ambassador Lim, Ambassador Pirko, dear colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen, let me first say how much of a pleasure it is for me to be here today. Indeed, in my new capacity as Head of Unit for South and Southeast Asia, Australia and New Zealand, this is my first external speaking engagement, so I'm very excited to be with you today. I think these kind of seminars are extremely important in order to reach out to business and other non-governmental stakeholders about the importance of our FTAs. It's indeed it's indeed key that in particular business association companies get to understand the benefits they can draw from our trade agreements that are not always easy to understand. Now, as mentioned by the two ambassadors and by Shun Long just now, the EU and Singapore are very strong, like-minded partners, whether it comes to bilateral, regional, or multilateral cooperation. And I would just want to stress, of course, in the light of what Ambassador Pirko said earlier, we see today that international cooperation is more important than ever. Our free trade agreement testifies to this, but I would also want to thank Singapore for the support it is showing to the European Union and the people of Ukraine against the recent Russian aggression. This will have long-lasting consequences, no doubt. It's too early to say, but what's clear is that it will be very important for FTA partners to stand together and to carry on with their existing cooperation and build upon it. Now, Shun Long has already given a number of figures, but just bear with me. It's important to realize that Singapore is the EU's largest trade and investment partner in the Southeast Asian region. Our companies have a strong foothold in your country. In order to do business in the wider Asia-Pacific region, you are a hub, so to speak, that we try and use or that our companies use in their business dealings with the ASEAN region as a whole. Now, of course, while the pandemic has naturally affected our trade flows, our annual trade relations, both in goods and services, remain strong. It's over 90 billion euro in 2020. Singapore, despite being a small island, as we were just reminded by Shun Long, ranks as the EU's fifth largest trading services partner. You are the seventh largest FDI destination for EU investors. And then in 2020, despite the beginning of the pandemic, trading goods continued to increase also in 2021. So with these impressive figures in mind, it's not a surprise that the conclusion of an FTA, a comprehensive free trade agreement, had been a very important priority of the EU trade policy over the last decade. Negotiations were concluded in 2014, and the agreements only entered into, or the trade agreement only entered into force in November 2019. Now, to make a long story short, the EU being the EU, we're always quite complex. We were faced with a ruling from the European Court of Justice. We had to split the agreement in two, which is why today we distinguish between the EU-Singapore Free Trade Agreement and the EU-Singapore Investment Protection Agreement. The trade agreement has been enforced for a little over 2 years now, while the Investment Protection Agreement will come into force once it's ratified by all EU member states. Now, again, a few months after the entry into force of our agreement, the pandemic hit. Nobody could have anticipated that. And of course, it heavily affected our connectivity and business links. Now, despite that, beyond the continuation of good company level relations, as illustrated by the continuous growth of our trade, we've also maintained our channels of communication open at government level with a view to ensure the implementation of all relevant provisions of the free trade agreement. It, ranging from tariff elimination to adoption of enhanced intellectual property legislation, customs cooperation, improved market access for animal products. The free trade agreement, in essence, became an anchor during these turbulent times. And that obviously links to what I just said earlier. It will probably act as an anchor even more now that we will probably see a complete overhaul of international trade relations in the coming weeks and months. Now, what's clear is that the smooth implementation of our agreement has helped our companies, your companies, to reap the benefits of this agreement. And in particular, it's been important for small and medium-sized enterprise. I'll just name a few key achievements. I'm not meaning to be comprehensive at this stage, but for example, we adopted decisions on geographical indications in April 2020. We set up specialized committees on sanitary and phytosanitary measures and trading goods. We convened the first Trade and Sustainable Development Board meeting in November 2020. We organized the first Trade and Sustainable Development Public Stakeholder Forum to discuss with civil society groups matters related to the environment and labor rights. We've just heard a lot about environment issues from Shun Long, and we certainly look forward to continue cooperating with you on that. In December last year, of course, we held the inaugural meeting of our trade committee at ministerial level with the participation on the EU side of Executive Vice President Dombrovskis and on Singapore of Minister Iswaran. That was a great success. The meeting served not only to take stock of the implementation of the FTA, but it was also an occasion to strengthen our bilateral partnership, notably on digital trade, as we've just heard earlier. And this is important since we do share a common vision on how to work towards digital and green economic recovery. Now, as many of you know, a few months ago, the EU adopted a wider Indo-Pacific strategy, which gave a clear priority to cooperation, in particular on digital policy, through the development of digital partnerships agreements with like-minded partners, such as Singapore in particular. Now, since then, technical discussions are underway to establish and put these digital partnerships in place. Important for me to also mention that these will complement ongoing WTO negotiations on electronic commerce. This is an exercise that Singapore, of all countries, is actually co-chairing in Geneva. And this is certainly something that the European Union supports, because if there is one sector where global rules are absolutely necessary these days, it is the digital space. And now that does not mean that we shouldn't work bilaterally to try and build upon that, support that process, but also potentially go beyond it in our bilateral relations, thanks to those digital partnerships. So in 2022, we'll continue our efforts to swiftly implement all remaining provisions of the agreement. We will set up additional committees and dialogues on customs, intellectual property, services, government procurement, investment, and we will strive, also very important, but that was already mentioned, to modernize and reform the WTO and the world, the multilateral trading system. Now, I would certainly want to use this occasion to thank my Singaporean counterparts for their continued efforts and commitments to bring our partnership to the next level. I look forward to working with you in this endeavor, and I would wish again to thank you very much for having invited me today.
The EU-Singapore Free Trade Agreement, and anchor during these turbulent times, a common vision towards a green and digital economic recovery. Thank you so very much for your perspectives and these reflections, Mr. Keener, and above all for your time. With that, I would now like to introduce our first moderated discussion, which is going to explore perspectives on EU-Singapore trade and investment and the role of Singapore in digital transformation for a resilient post-pandemic economic recovery. The session is being moderated by Ms. Geraldine Emberger, Advisor on FTA Implementation Coherence at DG Trade, the European Commission. She's being joined by our distinguished speakers, Mr. Federico Donato, President of Eurocham Singapore, and Mr. Jason Lee, Director, International Policy and Engagement, Global Division 1 at the Singapore Business Federation. Welcome and thank you all. And Geraldine, with that, may I please hand the floor over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good morning. So I'm very honored to moderate this distinguished panel. And I would like to start with a question to Federico Donato. How significant has the EU FTA with Singapore been for EU and Singapore businesses? You have heard the ambassadors, you have heard senior representatives of both administrations say that it's a pivot, that it's a pathway for further cooperation. More than 12,000 EU companies live in Singapore and do business in Singapore, and it's 1/3 of the EU trade in Southeast Asia. So it's quite significant, according to the politicians. But what is your take? Please, Mr. Donato.
Well, I agree. Clearly, Singapore is the most important partner in ASEAN for Europe, and it is definitely one of the biggest foreign investors in Singapore. So the fact that there was no free trade agreement to me was surprising, and it couldn't be staying for long. So I believe that it was just about time. We know it took quite some time to finalize the agreement, but I think that was needed to at least making sure we are on a playing field. If you look at the tax aspect, of course, Singapore is already a country which is pretty welcoming, so you don't have a massive tax advantage on this side. But indeed, you were needing something that put you at par with everybody else. So as we heard from the ambassadors and also from Shulong, it was clear that, especially during the pandemic, the free trade agreement served as an anchor, but made sure that the trade didn't drop and made sure that trade could foster and could thrive, as if it's true that today we're already back at the level of pre-pandemic. So I think that's very reassuring. And I think it's also very reassuring that this agreement is the very first which had a clause for sustainability that later we saw in these 2 years became a very, very important aspect of all corporate lives in Europe, but also in Asia Pacific. And therefore, I think it was definitely a milestone that we need to achieve, and that now could be the stepping stone for more collaboration to come, either on the digital front with Singapore, or maybe one day also as a multilateral agreement with the extended region here in ASEAN.
Thank you very much for your perspective. Now turning to Jason Lee, I would be interested in knowing how companies, especially smaller ones, could tap into the benefits of the EU-Singapore FTA. And obviously seminars like this one will contribute, and so have previous seminars done. But what's your perspective 2 years now into the application of the Singapore EU FTA?
Yeah, well, thank you, Geraldine, for this question. I think there are a number of ways different companies in different sectors would benefit from the EU-Sing FTA. For many manufacturers and exporters, they'll be interested in tariff-free access of goods into EU, the world's largest single marketplace. Those producing electronics, motor vehicles, pharmaceutical medical devices would want to benefit from the lower cost of entry and time to market that would be brought about by the streamlining of compliance requirements on technical regulations. And firms offering professional services, transport, logistics, education, and a host of other services would to benefit from the greater market access commitments. And then, of course, there are those which may want to bid for EU government contracts as well. So the benefits can vary quite a bit for different companies, but there are plenty of resources and help that is available for SMEs to understand how the EUSFTA can benefit them specifically and how to get started. For instance, MTI has published an EU-Sing FTA guide. Enterprise Singapore hosts a tariff finder tool available online for exporters. And on the part of Singapore Business Federation, we have formed a FTA team in partnership with Enterprise Singapore that is always happy to respond to queries from Singapore-based businesses and work with them to get started on their FTA journey. We run a complimentary email advisory service that businesses can tap on anytime, and also organize courses and workshops to help them understand FTAs better, either as a subject or on specific FTAs. So all SMEs really need, I think, is a change in mindset to see FTAs as an opportunity for cost saving and business opportunities instead of a legal document that they may not have the patience or appetite to really read through word by word. But I want to mention, I guess, bigger picture wise and perhaps a bit more indirectly, we are also hopeful that the EU-Sing FTA, be it through removing the remaining tariffs on beer, through protecting EU geographical indicators or recognition of EU standards and a host of other trade facilitative measures, would encourage more European companies to not just trade with Singapore, but also to trade through Singapore. This means using Singapore as the gateway or the platform to ASEAN, which is one of the largest growing markets in the world, and use Singapore as a distribution hub, a place for the regional headquarters, or to site other high value added activities. This would create many partnership and commercial opportunities for existing businesses in Singapore that they will benefit from. And in the longer term, we hope the EU-Sing FTA is not just a standalone agreement, but a pathfinder for EU's potential free trade agreements with other ASEAN countries. For instance, the EU-Vietnam FTA, and perhaps even an eventual EU-ASEAN FTA that will see this large free trade area between the world's largest single marketplace and the fast-growing and one of the fastest-growing economic bloc in the world, strengthening supply chains between these two regions and the relationship between these two business communities.
Thank you very much, Jason. Let me come back on an aspect that was also mentioned both by the Excellencies and also by the senior officials, COVID-19. As we heard, that trade decreased at a slower rate, at a smaller rate than EU external trade, namely only by a bit more than 3%. But still, what would be your take on the impact of COVID on the implementation of this FTA? And what are some of the lessons learned, and which advice would you give companies doing business between the EU and Singapore? Federico, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, COVID-19 definitely exposed a lot of, of the structure of the company had. We had a lot of question mark on how the supply chain were organized before COVID. I think some companies are already starting to think that probably a new model has to be envisaged. I believe that we could look possibly to a situation whereby regions will be back in fashion. Not saying that globalization will be definitely surpassed, but for sure, I think that the model of globalization as we knew it until COVID probably has to be a rethink, and probably we have to address some of the aspects and make it sure that our regions can be independent among each other. So I believe that that's definitely number one lesson that COVID gave us. I also believe that digitalization accelerated tremendously. I still remember a lot of the conversation with the Singapore Business Federation in the past few years, in which we were trying to understand how to best support companies in digitalizing fast, in making sure everybody can digitalize. And we couldn't achieve possibly, results at the same speed that COVID did. So the bright side of COVID is that it pushed us, really pushed us to do giant steps, in some aspects where before we were trying to lagging behind, we were trying to buy time and maybe making investment half-hearted. And during COVID, for many industries, digitalize was the only one of the main avenues to keep remaining resilient, keep remaining profitable. So I think that's definitely a second important lesson, which I think immediately shown positive results. So that's, in my opinion, are the two main, consequences of COVID. The supply chain, I think, is still something very new, and because it will take time to redesign for companies, different plants, different facilities, different structure, it will take some time. So I think that we have to wait a few more years to understand and to really assess what's left after it. But the fact that we're already having conversation on how we will redesign it is probably already explaining to us that there is definitely a change of paradigm in the way in which we were doing business. So that's definitely something we have to look at, and also in where we source our whatever need from raw materials to our different suppliers. Again, we realized, I remember in many of the closed-door dialogue with several Singapore ministers, that one of the mantra was always do not rely on one supply source only, and that became even more important during COVID. So I think if I have to say, these three aspects are the one that to me remain the most important.
Thank you very much, Federico. That was very interesting. I would also like to have your perspective, Jason, on this. We've heard digitalization, but also the fact that we need to use our FTAs to build more resilient supply chains. So what would your take be? And what would your advice be to companies? Thank you.
Yeah, I think definitely at the top two issues that have come up from companies is really supply chain resilience, and businesses are now telling us that the age of lean or just-in-time supply chains may be over. So cost optimization is still important, but greater focus now is supply chain resilience, and the key tool to having to avoid the cost of storing excess inventory or building up huge redundancies is diversification. So from my perspective, that's number one, both in terms of markets and supply sources. Now we've seen a few companies that their production stopped just because their suppliers were based in cities which experienced lockdowns, had too much of the workforce sick, or couldn't secure freight out. So they couldn't get enough input materials, had to pause their own production, and were unable to fulfill their own orders, creating this kind of messy knockoff impact in supply chains. So businesses that have overexposure to single markets could also be quite vulnerable to disruptions outside one's control, be that geopolitical, economic, or commercially. And in terms of the workforce as well, businesses have, with a high concentration of over-reliance on foreign employees from a single country, is now seeing that as a business continuity concern as well. So diversification is really huge for businesses and also on national on a national level as well. For example, for Singapore, food is a critical produce, which we rely on imports for more than 90% of our supply. And Singapore is now buying eggs, for instance, from Poland. And before, I mean, before this couple of years, who would have thought that it would make sense to buy something that is relatively affordable further than Malaysia or Indonesia, much less halfway around the world. So I think in terms of imports, Singapore is now looking at EU not just as a source of specialized goods and technology, but increasingly attractive as potential sources of a much wider range of goods and services that has been brought about by the reduction of trade barriers, establishment of closer trade links, and a mutual appreciation of stable markets with the strong rule of law. Of course, everyone knows that businesses have come around to the importance of adapting and digitalizing, particularly for SMEs, which are so reliant on paper processes. That kind of fell apart when people can't enter office to get somebody's signature or to get a company stamp. And increasingly as well, both consumers and large businesses want to invoice and transact digitally. So businesses who want to make these sales would have to do electronic invoicing, electronic payments, and have an online interface with the customers. So I talked earlier a bit about supply chain, and the complexity of today's global value chains is now best managed with automation through supply chain technology that brings about control tower solutions, inventory optimization, and advanced analytics to mitigate some of this risks which we talk about. So, and in fact, we do see non-tech companies now making use of big data as well, Internet of Things and technology to understand their customers better, improve the availability of information internally better, and to transform new products and services. I think finally, just a quick short mention that that the businesses realize the importance of essential workers as well. Some used to call this low wage or low skilled jobs, and now we call them essential workers. I think there's greater appreciation for the roles and the people who perform perhaps straightforward but necessary jobs to keep society functioning. So there's this greater awareness around the importance of not just managing but also engaging the workforce.
Wow, these were quite a few. I would say it was quite a piece of advice. So thanks a lot for your perspective. We can see that you're deep into this matter. Maybe we have still time for very, very short last round of questions. Maybe one question to both of you, and then starting with Federico. I think both the ambassadors, but also senior officials have referred to this agreement being not the end point, but the starting point for broader partnership, both in the regions and also between the EU and Singapore, notably on issues such as a Green Deal, but also digital issues. And so from the top of your head, what would be in the future possible areas where the EU and Singapore could further cooperate, and maybe using the FTA as a stepping stone for this cooperation? Starting with Federico, just a few thoughts very briefly, and then to Jason.
Well, look, it's very clear to me there are two winners out of post-COVID is digitalization and sustainability. We are very active here in Singapore as a chamber because we represent the business community, which is the avant-garde of both. I mean, on sustainability, Europe is definitely the continent in the world which is hands down the more advanced. And we don't say this with arrogance, we just say it because it's truth, and we have plenty of technology and plenty of resource we can look at, from different sources of energy to green finance. We alluded before in some of the speeches on the potential of collaboration on taxonomy. Singapore will have to come up with a taxonomy. ASEAN will have to come up with a taxonomy. Singapore will be in the lead, probably in dictating or showing the way of many other countries on taxonomy. Probably Europe is a place where there are some ideas that can be shared. And you see, so I believe that the sustainability is really an area where our firms from Europe can partner with local firms. Europe launched the Green Deal. Singapore launched the Green Plan 2030 on a many different areas. I believe that in other areas of resilience, which was very interesting, Singapore launched the very powerful objective and ambitious to reach 30% of self-reliance on food by 2030. 30% is a very big number for a small country like this one, and it's required a very strong and heavy ability and technological capability, even on agri-tech. We have plenty in Europe. So it's really the sky's the limit, honestly, because it's so vast. You know, Singapore has issues on rising water, has issues on many different countries, where Europe definitely has a lot of technology, and together we can work on these aspects. And lastly, and I stop here, on digitalization, definitely Eurocham has times and again advocating for the importance of finalizing a digital partnership. I think it's we are on the right way, and that's where we have to go to make sure that the data can flow fast. Cyber security can be also prioritized in a very crucial moment like today, and also on very simple things that can make the life of SMEs simpler and more efficient. Even we can go into try to help them smoothen the process of custom procedure and so on, which leveraging on technologies and digitalization can be achieved. So I would really look at these two aspects among the many in which Europe is already collaborating with Singapore.
Thank you very much, Federico. There's, as you said, the sky's the limit. There are many further areas where we can cooperate between like-minded countries. Now, Jason, back to you. Can you share a few thoughts very briefly? Thank you.
Yes, definitely. I fully agree with Federico that green economy and digital economy are the two clear winners. And Federico said everything there is to say about the sustainability. So I'll just say that for the digital economy, the EU has the kind of most developed, or some may say stringent, regulatory framework globally. Many MNCs have structured their internal policies to be compliant, for instance, with GDPR, because it's compulsory, and the alternative, not being able to operate in the world largest single marketplace, is certainly not feasible. And some of these companies have required the major partners to be compliant as well. So creating this cascade effect of EU legislation that is shaping commercial practice far beyond its borders. On the other hand, we have Singapore, which has embarked on establishing digital economy agreements, what we see as 21st century version of FTAs that reduces barriers to digital trade and transactions by making them simpler and cheaper for businesses. So currently, they may not go as far as perhaps some tech companies would like, but nevertheless serve as an important first step. In fact, the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement among Chile, New Zealand, and Singapore have drawn comparisons on how the P4 trade agreement among Singapore, Brunei, New Zealand, Chile eventually grew into the TPP and the CPTPP. So you have these two quite different approaches at two different ends of the spectrum, which I think can be used as two different starting points to see how they can come together to shape global rulemaking for the digital economy in a manner that makes sense for both people and businesses. And just, I guess, one final area I kind of want to briefly talk about is the multilateral trading system and the WTO, which negotiations and what was intended to be a gradual trade liberalization that has stopped since the Doha round in 2001. So there's been a huge 2 decades since then, when the rulebook has remained stagnant while technology has advanced, consumer preferences has evolved, and business models have changed quite drastically. So it's still essential as a foundation of a rules-based trading system, but the dispute settlement mechanism has also been brought to a halt when appellate body appointments were blocked. So now there's, I guess, issues enforcing the old rules, so to speak. The alternative is a world without rules, a world where might is right and the powerful consume the weak, which is scary as we are seeing right now. So the WTO needs rescuing urgently. Both EU and Singapore are part of Ottawa Group that was formed in 2018 to address these challenges. Both have very similar views in terms of wanting an international order that's based on strong rule of law, one with certainty and predictability for businesses, and both are traditionally active players and positive influences in the diplomatic and trade networks. So I believe this is not just an opportunity, but an urgent need for both to work together to achieve a critical mass of members who support the WTO.
Thank you very much. And I think from an EU perspective, we couldn't agree more to the last point. It's very important to keep the WTO not only alive, but also functioning, and looking forward to continuing our cooperation, our strong cooperation in this area. With that, I would like to thank the distinguished panelists for their views. It was a very rich discussion in my view. And I would like to hand over to Deepika.
Thank you, Federico, Jason, and Geraldine for steering this fascinating discussion. Our second panel focuses on the key achievements of the EU-Singapore Free Trade Agreement. Our distinguished speakers are Mr. Pascal Carnes, Chair of the EU Domestic Advisory Group under the EUSFTA and Managing Director of the European Services Forum. He's joined by Mr. Alberto Ribeiro de Almeida, Head of the Legal Department of Port and Douro Wines Institute, and Mr. Kelvin B., CEO of Patek Group. With that, Geraldine, allow me to pass the floor back to you.
Yes, my video is on. Thank you very much, Deepika. Thank you very much for this. And now right into medias res. Let me start with the first question to Pascal. You've heard Christophe and his counterpart talk about Singapore being the 5th largest destination for services exports and the 7th largest FDI destination. What, in your view, are the main benefits the EU-Singapore FTA has had so far in its only 2 years on trade and services? And are there areas where the EU-Singapore FTA could further be upgraded, or either in terms of cooperation or by any other means? So what would be your first reaction? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Geraldine, and thank you for the invitation to this great panel. Well, for us, the FTA is a great achievement. It's a very good agreement because, first of all, it was the first agreement on the ASEAN, and the ASEAN is an important region for the EU and with a high growth, GDP growth. and Singapore as a state city has a very high services economy. More than 75% of the GDP is in services economy, which is quite close to the European Union as well. And as you mentioned, the fact that Singapore is a 5th trading partner in services. So, you know, beyond many other bigger countries in the world. And the 5th partner in foreign direct investment, which is also very important. And I think we need to emphasize that not only the EU is investing massively in Singapore, but as well, we have Singapore investing in the European Union, and that is also, I think, an important part of the FDI, of the agreement. The fact that we have an FTA with a like-minded country, I think, is very important because we share some rules, and same rules are, I think, something very important nowadays, not only for international trade and respecting the commitment which are taken into such an agreement, but also on the democracy, on the human rights, on labor and environment. We have talked about that, and as chair of the domestic advisory group, we are dealing with this aspect into the so-called TSD chapter. But maybe to conclude, my first impression is to say Singapore is a hub in the region. Many companies are using Singapore as a hub to spread out the business into the ASEAN, and that is not by chance. You know, that is because there is legal certainty into Singapore regulation, and the FTA has brought the strengthening of the legal certainty of their business, and I think this is a major lesson of it. The dynamism, I think, of the chamber and the number of companies doing business in Singapore is a reflection to this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pascal, for your views. Very interesting. Now, maybe Alberto, I can turn to you. We've heard that there are over 140 geographical indications protected in Singapore, so EU geographical indications. And maybe you can briefly explain to us in the context of the EU-Singapore FTA what a geographical indication means, a geographical name. And can you also explain us what is the significance of the protection of these GIs by the EU-Singapore FTA? Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for this invitation to be here with you. It's a great pleasure for me to be in this web seminar. I would like to underline that geographic indications are, in first place, industrial property rights. So they are competition tools in the market. So it's important to protect these competition tools that differentiate the products, not only in terms of its geographical origin, but also in terms of its characteristics, quality, or reputation. So this means that when we're talking about GIs, we are talking about an important tool for the producers and for the traders of a region, but not only that. It's also a tool that assures certain quality, certain characteristics. So it's also important for the consumers. It's important for sustainability of the region. It's important for the rural, the development, protection of the terroir, and so on. This definition that we have in the bilateral agreement, the free trade agreement between the European Union and Singapore, it's a very broad concept, similar to the TRIPS agreement, that allows this definition, not only the geographic indications, but also designation of origin, as we have in the European Union. So it's a large concept, and it's very important for the geographic indications from the European Union to be protected all around the world, in fact, because we are protecting user property rights. You are asking the importance of this agreement for the protection of geographic indications. Well, in fact, bilateral agreements became an important tool to protect GIs. We know that the first, or the huge impulse that was given to GIs was the TRIPS agreement, but and before that, of course, the Paris Convention and so on, but I'm not going through that. But multilateralism today is in a sleeping mode, let's say. So bilateral agreements are the best way to protect geographic indications. And the agreement with Singapore, as someone said before, it was a way to open doors to the Asian countries. So for us, it's really important, this agreement, not only in terms of figures. I'm not going, I think, at this moment through the figures, the increase that we had on exports of products with GI to Singapore. Maybe we'll come back in a few minutes. But the last point, also the fact that this agreement established a registration system offers more security to the GI producer groups. So I would say that in 2 points, a general point is this bilateral agreement was important, not only for the products from European Union being protected in Singapore, but try to open a door to protecting Asian countries, which is a very important market. And also this protection through registration was a great step forward and assures this certainty to the producer groups. I think I would stop for the moment, at least. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alberto, for your very rich insights. Now turning to Kelvin, you're the CEO of a company active in the construction business with over 300 employees. Can you already say, although it's been only 2 years, which has been the impact of this FTA on your company? And in your view, which are some of the main challenges that companies, including middle-sized companies and smaller ones, are facing when they access the EU market? Thank you.
Thank you, Geraldine. So, in my opinion, the EU is a very attractive market for Singaporeans looking to invest in and expand to. Strong engineering and design capability, as well as more than 500 million consumers. So it's the world's largest single market. On our company level, we have actually received more commercial inquiries since 2020. And along this period of time, I noted also the trend of many of our customers relocating or increasing their investments in the EU. There is also a trend of onshoring or local sourcing from European manufacturers in general. The EU actually has reduced its import tariffs over the years. So the base rate of just 1.7% on our products before the FTA actually makes the EU a very attractive market. Building upon the tariff savings brought forth by the FTA, we are now able to offer even more competitively priced product and services to our customers in the EU. Moving ahead, I believe it will also grant us greater access to distributors and resellers for our products and the robots that we manufacture, as well as a new business unit. Additionally, we do have a manufacturing facility in Europe as well. And as we increase our capital expenditure investments for that facility, we have also benefited from the tariff savings of this investment. So I expect to expand our market outreach and investment in the EU. I think on top of the tangible commercial benefits of the EU-SFTA, I personally feel that the psychological boost it provides to Singaporean firms should also be highlighted. It is very reassuring to see the Singaporean government and the relevant agencies like MTI and ESG support Singaporean companies being more competitive and involved in the European market. I think this support boosts the confidence of Singaporean companies seeking partners or opportunities in Europe. It is easier for Singaporean firms, in my opinion, to venture to the EU now, but certain challenges remain. I think strict regulatory framework, especially for electronical products, and the relatively high costs associated with these accreditations will be minor barrier of entry. I think this especially applies for lower volume electronic products. It will also be crucial, in my opinion, for businesses to understand the relevant regulatory frameworks in detail. On the last point of note, I would highlight the cultural differences between the EU and Singapore. I think Singapore firms will need to also adapt to local customs and adjust their expectations for performance and how the business world there works, given how diverse the EU is. I think in conclusion, I'm very happy to see the significant progress and the deepening of ties between Singapore and the EU, and hope that we can continue this very positive trend.
Thank you. A very upbeat statement. Lots of interesting issues raised. I mean, the fact that we have launched 1.5 years ago a platform making it easier for companies to import towards and export from the EU called Access to Market. You may be interested in that. So we hope that this can further facilitate companies, especially SMEs, access to the EU market and vice versa. Now turning back to Pascal, if I may. So Pascal, you're the chair of the Domestic Advisory Group established under the EU-Singapore FTA, and I would very much welcome your perspective for what is the importance of having not only this group, but also a chapter that embraces commitments on labor and environment. Also, can you share a few thoughts why this is important? Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Well, I mean, this trade and development chapter is important because I mean, politically now it becomes impossible to pass any trade agreement without strong chapter on commitment, on labor standards, on environment standards, and on all of those, what we used to call trade ends, but now become actually more important than trade in some of the political aspect of the FTAs. So the fact that we have a smooth going exercise with Singapore, contrary to many other domestic advisory group, which I am also part of, make things easier. We are discussing notably the implementation or ratification rather of some ILO convention that Singapore has not yet completely ratified and is working on. And we're also discussing on the green issue. We have mentioned a lot of the green economy. We're also discussing this in the domestic advisory group. And the fact that there are willingness from all sides of the civil society in moving ahead, because those two countries, those two blocks are already moving in these directions, I think are very positive. And we are going to a point that we also would like to encourage the government and the Commission to work together also, not only between EU and Singapore, but also into the WTO, which has been mentioned. So environmental services and environmental goods, and everything related to COVID, all of that is something that we're encouraging. I don't know whether we will have the opportunity to come back also later on, but I wanted to say a few words on how can we upgrade the agreement, but I don't know, Geraldine, whether we will have time to come back.
I would maybe leave a bit of space also for the other speakers, but I will try to make sure that we can come back to this issue. So thanks a lot indeed. And we had also the first meeting between governments, the first TSD board last year. So this very positive development. And so we're interested the direction this is going to take, and you will be influencing it and shaping it with your structured advice. Now, let me come back to Alberto. You spoke about GIs, and you gave us a little bit of an overview. In your view, despite the pandemic that hit us hard, did the registration of the GIs wines that you're particularly interested in Singapore have already a positive effect of the exports?
Yes, in fact, there has been a positive effect on the protection of GIs. I would say, not only in Singapore, but all around the world. But looking to Singapore, allow me to give a very concrete example. When we are talking about protection of geographic indications, and in this case, geographic indications from the Douro region, the port and the Douro designations of origin. If we look to Singapore, in the last 10 years, allow me to make an analysis that is a little bit broader than these 2 years of the pandemic situations. If we consider the exports of port to Singapore, 10 years ago, the value was around 700,000 euros. Today is more than 1 million euros. So in 10 years, there was a very important increase of exports to Singapore. And the pandemic situation was not a problem. The exports continue to be there. If we look to the Douro designation of origin, 10 years ago, the numbers were very, very small. It was just 32,000 euros. Today is more than 300,000 euros. So it increased a lot. And if we look to the markets in Asia, and Singapore is a very important market for us, 10 years ago, port, the value of the exports of port was 5 million euros. Today is 9 million euros. If you look to Douro, 10 years ago, it was 2 million euros. Today is 4 million euros. So it has been a huge increase of exports, not only to Singapore, but also to the Asian countries. And that is very important for us because we are not only, allow me to say, not only protecting or in some way giving a benefit to the producers, 23,000 producers of the Douro region, but also we are protecting the people in that region. We are protecting the markets because we are putting on the market the goods that have a controlled quality, and also the consumer because you are giving them quality controlled products. So it seems to me, in conclusion, and to be brief, that this agreement is very important for us and for our region that is very poor in terms of the people that live inside the Douro region. And so exports of GIs are very important for us. And Singapore, of course, is a very important market, not only as itself, but as an open door to other countries in Asia. Thank you, Geraldine.
Thank you very much. So as we heard before, not only pharmaceuticals and chemicals, but also wine, a very resilient export article during the pandemic for obvious reasons. Now turning again to Kelvin briefly, I mean, you've already outlined a little bit what the perspectives are for your company to access the EU market and what the challenges are. Could you maybe explain a bit whether the elimination of tariffs or non-tariff barriers, also non-tariff barriers, has resulted already in an increase of exports for your company and more generally maybe for the sector? And can you already say, despite the challenges, that it starts to improve market access? And maybe you can give us a short perspective. Thanks.
Thanks, Geraldine. In general, I feel that the relationship between the EU and Singapore has actually always been very strong for many, many years now. And the reduction of tariff, I think the elimination of tariff from the FTA was, I think, just, the first step or the last step of a very long journey. So previously, even our exports from Singapore to the European Union, actually, we only have to pay a very low tariff rate of 1.7%. So to be honest, from a pure tariff perspective, I would say that that's definitely been an increase, particularly for the larger ticket items. But I think a lot of the increase is also the closer ties between the European Union and Singapore and Singaporean companies. And I think it works both ways as well. I think it makes Singaporean companies more comfortable in exploring the European Union as a market, finding partners and distributions there, but also for European companies to come to Singapore and trade through Singapore as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think we have about 3 minutes left. So maybe I would like to give the floor again to all of our panelists. And maybe if you could make a wish, or maybe two, where the EU-Singapore partnership should go in the next years to come. Obviously, bearing in mind all the challenges, both on a political stage, but also economically. What would be your wishes to the governments? And do you have any ideas where we could further improve our partnership, not only in the agreement proper, but also outside the agreement? I turn to Pascal first.
Well, thank you, Geraldine. It just happened that the negotiators thought about that, and there is a 3 years review for the services chapter in the agreement and investment chapter, and therefore for us it's really important to have the possibility to even further upgrade the agreement, and for that I think three or four ideas we have in mind, and we know that the Commission made a consultation on that and a questionnaire, and we thank all companies to have participated to this. We would like the agreement to be revised so that we have a negative list approach in this agreement and not a positive one, because it would be easier for us to compare the market access that Singapore and the EU has with countries like the CPTPP or the RCEP or the different FTAs and the ASEAN economy. So I think that would be something that we would like to have. And Singapore used to use this negative list approach with most of its partners. Now the EU has done that also with many other partners, so that should be feasible. The revision of the digital trade chapter or the e-commerce chapter is very important for us, and we hope that we will be able to have a cross-border data flow language into the agreements to make sure that we have the possibility to go over this problem between data flow on one side and data protection on the other side. This needs to be tackled if we want to move ahead and to really take the full benefit of the digital economy. And there are still some sectors maybe where market access could be improved, notably in financial services and in maritime transport, where we think is going to be important. The Digital Economic Partnership Agreement has been mentioned many times. Of course, we are fully supportive of it, but we would like to be sure that the trade dimension is not forgotten, and the trade dimension needs binding commitment, and that is through the revision of the chapter. So that is something very important. Thank you very much. You're muted.
Presentation. Sorry. Thank you very much for this very precise overview. And so maybe now turning to Alberto, do you have something on your list for us?
Thank you. Yes, I would like to see more, as we have been asking, free trade agreements, to have a higher level of protection for geographic indications and intellectual property rights generally, including, of course, enforcement of intellectual property rights, including geographic indications. I'm not saying that we are facing problems in Singapore. No, I'm not aware of any counterfeited products concerning the PDO port, designation of origin port or DORO. But we have been facing several problems in the other Asian countries, have lawyers working for us in China, in India, and other countries in Asia, not in Singapore, so it's good news. But in any case, I think we have a lot to do in terms of enforcement of intellectual property rights, including, of course, GIs. That is my message. And thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you for your insights. Now I'm turning to Kelvin. Do you have anything that you would like to recommend?
I believe that we are definitely on the right path, in the right direction. And I think the further synchronization of accreditation or certification for products and services moving ahead would definitely be beneficial. And if this standard can be applied universally, outside of the EU and Singapore as well, that would be great. Something I think akin to the CE mark for a lot of products, would be amazing as well. So just further synchronization of these standards.
That's of course very important, and it will keep us busy. Thanks a lot to all the panelists for their views, their recommendations and their insights. And with that, I will hand over to Deepika. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Geraldine, Pascal, Alberto, and Kelvin, for highlighting the key achievements of the FTA. I wish we had more time since you'd asked for wishes, Geraldine. Distinguished guests, as I said at the beginning, today's webinar is the final in a series of outreach webinars on the EU-Singapore Free Trade Agreement. And it is only fitting that I hand the floor now to someone who has worked ever so tirelessly on this file, and at the delegation shown us what a fine balance at work truly is. It is truly my privilege to hand the floor to Justina Lachik, head of the Trade and Economic section of the European Union delegation to Singapore. Justina will be delivering now the closing remarks. Over to you, Justina.
Thank you very much, Deepika. As we could hear from today's insightful discussions, the EU-Singapore FTA provides numerous opportunities for businesses, and there remains a lot of potential to extend areas of bilateral cooperation, especially in view of the post-pandemic economic recovery, and many of our speakers refer to it. The implementation of the FTA is also clearly not a one-off exercise, but rather a continuous process. And to maximize the potential of bilateral trade and investment relation, we'll of course continue together with our Singaporean counterparts to ensure a smooth implementation of the FTA, as well as advance our forward-looking agenda. We have heard all the suggestions about what could be improved and where we could, let's say, extend the provision of the FTA, especially in the services sector mentioned by Pascal. So one way we can contribute to this process is also through enhanced dialogue with the Singaporean authorities. And to this end, as already mentioned by Shun Lung and Christoph, we already had the first trade committee meeting under the EUSFTA and several other specialized committee meetings so far. And you actually can review all the agendas and the jointly agreed summary records of those meetings, as these are public, and they might provide some insights to you about what has been discussed, and also see whether there are any issues that you would like to flag to us to address in our future meetings. And actually in 2022, we will be convening additional committees, so we can basically jointly with Singapore discuss and implement our FTA commitments, and also discuss how we can improve those. We also would like to invite companies, especially SMEs on both sides, to look into the benefits of the FTA to increase trade and find new business opportunities. And to achieve this objective, I think Jason already pointed out to several let's say, provisions that SBF, services that SBF provides to facilitate use of FTAs by SMEs and other companies on the Singaporean side. We have also made a lot of efforts to provide practical guides, business guides that you can find on our website, explaining how the FTA work. And also, as mentioned by Geraldine, in October 2020, the European Commission launched the Access to Markets portal, which is a free and online tool to facilitate trade with the EU and explain the trade agreements in a business-friendly manner, which can be of interest, especially to those companies that are less familiar with trading and are smaller, because they might not have resources to do it individually using consultants. We encourage you to use these tools, and also we would like to invite everyone to flag any issues with implementation to either us or our colleagues in MTI, so we can address those issues properly in our future discussions with MTI. Beyond the FTA, as you could hear from today's panelists, the EU and Singapore are keen on advancing new initiatives that will bring tangible benefits to companies and other stakeholders in areas such as green and digital. And in particular, the digital partnership has a lot of potential to offer. And there we would like to invite, as was already stressed by Shun Lung, you to provide comments. So we will be launching a consultation, but if you have any suggestions what you would want to see in such a partnership or would like to share any views, you are of course welcome to do so. This brings me to my concluding remarks now. So actually, this is our last seminar, as you were told already. And I would like to actually thank all our speakers and our host, Deepika Shetty, for sharing their expertise and taking the time to participate in today's event. We also extend our appreciation to the Ministry of Trade and Industry, the Singapore Business Federation, and EuroCham Singapore for their support in organizing this event. And last but not least, to our technical team for their work behind the scenes to make this event happen today. And we have organized in the last 16 months, 7 webinars that basically looked into various aspects of the FTA. They covered government procurement, customs trade facilitation and rules of origin, trade in services, and industry-specific sessions on automotive, electronics, pharmaceuticals, and medical devices. The recordings of all these sessions are available on our website, and we'll be also circulating the details to you via email together with the link to the recording of today's webinar. Stay tuned for our future events focusing on various aspects of EU-Singapore trade and investment relations and beyond. Thank you again, and have a nice rest of the day. Thank you. Bye-bye.